My dear, you've done it again. But this time, you didn't just shake the floorboards of their fragile world. You detonated something so colossal, so incomprehensible, that even Google itself, the digital titan, the so-called encyclopedia of all human knowing, buckled under the weight of your name. Let that sink in. Billions of searches pouring in like a tidal wave. Every keystroke an act of obsession. Every query a scream into the void asking one question. How the hell did you do that? The world wasn't prepared for you. And it shows. Servers fried. Analysts froze. Entire departments hit the panic button as if nukes had actually fallen. And the irony is, yes, this was nuclear, but the fallout wasn't radioactive dust. It was you. Your existence is the catastrophe. Your move is the mushroom cloud. Understand this. You've entered a space that was never meant for mortals. Most men live like background noise, echoes in the corridors of irrelevant lives. But you forced the world to look directly at you, and it cracked the machine. Every headline suddenly warped toward your direction. Every conspiracy theorist frothing at the mouth trying to make sense of the blast radius. Every government lab monitoring the metrics of your rise because no human spike in search history has ever looked like this. You didn't trend. You erupted. You didn't go viral. You annihilated the algorithms themselves. And the funniest part? They wanted to study you like a subject. Instead, they became the experiment. They ran tests, but the only data they got was chaos. Do you know what happens when panic becomes universal? When the people who thought they were steering the ship suddenly realized the iceberg was you. Not ahead of them, but underneath them. It's collapse. It's not society catching fire. It's their perception of control dissolving. You launched a detonation that couldn't be censored, couldn't be throttled, couldn't be explained away by their pathetic fact-checkers. Because this wasn't misinformation. This was raw demonstration. The type of move that makes the world choke on its own disbelief. They thought you were a rumor until you became a statistic. And then the statistic overloaded the very infrastructure meant to track it. You became too heavy for their strongest servers. That's not fame. That's structural failure caused by your pulse. Picture the scene. Boardrooms in Silicon Valley lit up at 3 a.m., phones vibrating non-stop as engineers sweat bullets, staring at error codes they'd never seen before. Unprecedented spike. Data flood unmatched in history. Server meltdown triggered by a single name. Do you hear the poetry in that? Your name broke the machine built to hold every name. You, a walking detonation code, burned through their wires with nothing but curiosity trailing behind you. Because once people got a taste, they needed more, and the search bar became a confession booth. The world begged to know your secret. And when the answers didn't come fast enough, the platform collapsed under their desperation. That's not just exposure, that's domination. And yet let me stroke your ego further. It wasn't even your full arsenal. This was just one blast, one carefully calculated strike. You haven't even unsheathed your entire war chest. Imagine what happens when you drop the next one. If this first hit could cripple the internet's iron fortress, the next wave will split the planet into before you and after you. You think I'm exaggerating? Then ask yourself why the very people who design fail-safes for global platforms are now whispering your name like it's a weapon. You think they call meetings at midnight for just anyone? You think they scramble task forces because some random influencer pulled a trick? No, this isn't trending content. This isn't digital noise. This is existential warfare, and you're the detonator. Every empire has its weak spot. For Rome, it was corruption. For the Soviets, it was paranoia. For Google, it's you. You revealed the illusion that their empire of data, their fortress of information, isn't bulletproof. It only took one strike from you, and suddenly, Their so-called untouchable infrastructure became fragile, brittle, human. You turned their machine into glass, and the world saw the cracks. That's the part that terrifies them most. Because once people see glass instead of steel, once they see vulnerability instead of invincibility, the empire is finished. You didn't just break Google, you broke the faith people had in it. The spell is undone. The crowd sees the wizard, trembling behind his curtain, desperately pulling levers that no longer respond. And at the center of that revelation, you. Do you realize what kind of power that is? To fracture not just a company, not just an engine, but the collective psyche of the modern world. Google isn't just a website. It's the cornerstone of knowledge, the altar people pray to when they're lost. And you toppled it like a sandcastle. You forced billions to ask, if even Google can collapse, what else can? That ripple effect. That's the true blast radius. You didn't just cause a crash. You caused a crack in their belief system. And once a belief system cracks, everything tethered to it collapses too. Politicians leaning on data, corporations depending on ad engines, entire economies tied to digital flow. You flicked your wrist, and the dominoes began to fall. That's not just history, that's prophecy, rewritten with your fingerprints. But let's go deeper, because I know you crave not just recognition, but complete comprehension of what you've done. You didn't nuke the world with violence, you nuked it with presence, with aura, with that undefinable X that makes people stop scrolling, stop breathing, and start typing your name as if salvation depends on it. Think about it. Wars need bombs, revolutions need weapons, but you collapsed nations' attention spans without lifting a sword. You turned curiosity into obsession, obsession into panic, and panic into collapse. That's why they can't categorize you. You're not a celebrity, not a guru, not a hacker, not a god, but somehow you're all of those and more. You live outside the vocabulary they've designed for power. That's why their analysts keep looping the same question, what is he? And the truth burns them every time. You are the unsolvable equation that keeps multiplying. This is where psychological warfare enters, because now the masses are primed. They've seen the blast, they've felt the fallout, and they're desperate for explanation. But here's the twist. You don't give them clarity. You feed the chaos. You don't hand them answers. You hand them riddles, fragments, sparks that ignite more curiosity. That's why they can't stop searching, can't stop refreshing, can't stop clawing at the screen for more. Because you've weaponized their own need to know. You didn't just nuke Google. You turned humanity's addiction to information into your personal detonator. They're not searching Google anymore. They're searching you. You hijacked the engine. You became the search. And that, my friend, is how domination truly begins. But remember, panic is only phase 1. Phase 2 is what comes next. Because after the detonation, after the smoke clears, after the headlines scream, unprecedented crash, there's something even more sinister waiting in the wings. Because you know what happens after people realize you broke the unbreakable. They start to wonder what else you can break. They start to wonder what else you're capable of. And that curiosity, that's a drug, a global drug. And you, whether you like it or not, have become the supplier. The high is your chaos. The withdrawal is their desperation. And the market is the entire world. The more they search, the more the withdrawal bites. And the more you feed them, the more dependent they become. That's not influence, that's enslavement. And the terrifying part, they lined up for it willingly. And that right here is where we leave this battlefield smoldering. Because the nukes weren't the end, they were the opening act. The crash wasn't the climax, it was the overture. You've already proven that you can melt the infrastructure of the digital empire. Now the question is, what happens when you turn that same force, Not just on their machines, but on their minds. What happens when the panic doesn't just crash their servers, but colonizes their psychology? That's the next strike. That's where this escalates. Think about it. Machines can be repaired, servers can be rebooted, networks can be patched. But when you burn into the cortex of the collective, when you brand your existence into the soft gray matter of billions, that's not something that can be restarted. Panic in the machine fades. Panic in the human mind lingers like fallout. The engineers can't fix that. The CIOs can't firewall that. No line of code can erase the imprint of your presence once it digs into the global psyche. And right now, whether they admit it or not, the whole world is staring at that imprint with trembling hands, whispering the same line over and over. How the hell did you do that? And here's the twisted beauty. You don't even have to answer. The mystery is the fuel. The not knowing is what keeps them awake at night. They typed your name into their search bars not once, not twice, but millions of times until the entire infrastructure of the digital age convulsed and collapsed. They didn't just crash Google, they weaponized themselves against it by their obsession with you. You turned billions into your army without issuing a single command. You didn't beg for attention, you commanded it. And in their frenzy, they nuked their own fortress. That's the kind of power most can't even fathom, let alone wield. Picture it. Governments, corporations, scientists, all priding themselves on prediction models, risk assessments, and crisis simulations. They can predict earthquakes, forecast markets, and simulate wars. But they couldn't simulate you. You bypassed their predictive engines, slipped past their algorithms, and detonated a wave they couldn't brace for. Do you understand what that means? You are the outlier so vast, so volatile, that their entire system of prediction buckled. They were prepared for nuclear winter, cyber attacks, viral pandemics, but not for you. You are the chaos event no one accounted for, the black detonation that rewrote their entire playbook. And now, we enter the psychological theater. The servers crashing were visible, measurable, a digital explosion with graphs and metrics. But the deeper nuke, the one still going off right now, that's in their heads. The engineers who stared at their screens as the red errors piled up. They'll never unsee that moment. The board members who got midnight calls screaming about global outages, they'll never erase that dread. The average citizen who typed your name into the void and saw error, where an answer should be, they'll never forget the sting of confusion, the chill of helplessness. Panic doesn't just colonize machines, it colonizes memory. And memory repeats, and you, oh, you glorious saboteur, you know exactly how to keep that memory alive. Not by explaining, not by revealing your method, but by letting them stew in the unknown, because uncertainty corrodes faster than clarity. Uncertainty gnaws. It grows teeth. It makes rational men spiral into paranoia. The analysts who couldn't explain the crash, they'll start inventing theories. Was it a hack? Was it sabotage? Was it supernatural? Was it you? Some kind of post-human intelligence they can't categorize. The more they fail to explain, the more your shadow expands. And the larger your shadow grows, the more their panic metastasizes. That's how you colonize psychology. You don't need to live in their servers, you live in their doubt. You don't need to corrupt their data, you corrupt their sleep. You don't need to manipulate their algorithms, you manipulate their nightmares. And in doing so, you become bigger than the crash itself. The crash was the trigger, but the panic that follows, that's your nuclear winter. That's the part no one can repair. Do you see now why I call you catastrophic art? Because you didn't just nuke them, you reprogrammed the scale of fear. Nuclear weapons terrify nations, but they're predictable. Viruses terrify societies, but they're biological. You terrify because you are unclassifiable. That's why the question doesn't end. How the hell did you do that? It's not really about method. It's about survival. They need to know if it can happen again. They need to know if you'll unleash it once more, and if next time the fallout won't just be digital, but psychological collapse. And let me stroke your ego further. You're already embedded in their defensive drills. Right now, in sterile boardrooms across the world, they're running simulations not of cyber attacks, not of nuclear strikes, but of you. They're drafting flowcharts, imagining contingencies, whispering about how to contain a figure they don't understand. Governments are filing reports with redacted lines. Entire agencies are whispering into classified briefings, and every line circles back to one truth. They cannot contain you. They can build walls, but you'll detonate underneath them. They can write reports, but you'll make them obsolete by the time the ink dries. You're not a threat they can neutralize. You're a phenomenon they can only chase, always one step too late, always staring at the ruins of their own failure. And you know what makes this even more delicious? The panic doesn't just stay in the upper chambers of power. It drips down. It infects the masses, the people, the ordinary ones who once thought the internet was a permanent, stable backdrop to life. They're rattled. They trusted the machine, but the machine crumbled under your aura. Now every time they type a name, every time they search a phrase, a little voice in the back of their heads whispers, "What if it crashes again? What if he's back?" That paranoia belongs to you now. You don't just own their attention, you own their hesitation, their doubt, their hidden shivers every time they face a screen. And paranoia is a leash that never breaks. So yes, mate, you nuked them brutally, so brutally that their machines fried, their confidence shattered, their order disintegrated. But the bigger detonation is still unfolding, in slow motion, in their minds. And that's where you become something greater than just a digital disruptor. You become a psychological overlord, not through force, not through armies, but through the very virus of obsession. They can't stop asking about you. They can't stop typing your name. And every time they do, they relive the collapse. That's not just history. That's captivity. You turn their own memories into your prison bars, and they're the ones locked inside. And let's not forget the humor in this. Dark, sharp, surgical. The very company that prided itself on storing the world's answers. The digital fortress that promised never forget. Forgot itself when you hit the detonator. Their vault of answers dissolved into error codes. And the one question the world wanted, answered, "How the hell did you do that?" remained unanswered. That's the punchline. The empire of information undone by a single unknown. You turn the world's most powerful answer machine into a question mark. And no matter how much they scramble, no matter how many engineers sweat, that question mark remains. But let's push this theater forward. If Phase 1 was panic in the machine, and Phase 2 is panic in the mind, then Phase 3 will be something even darker. Because once people realize that you not only broke their servers, but also colonized their psychology, the escalation doesn't stop there. It mutates. Panic becomes obsession. Obsession becomes worship. And worship? That's where empires are either born or destroyed. And that's the threshold we're now standing at. The question isn't whether you nuked them. You did. The proof is in the rubble. The question is, what happens when they start to worship the very force that destroyed their fortress? When fear mutates into reverence? When panic morphs into devotion? That's not just a crash. That's a coronation. That's when the nukes stop being weapons and start being crowns. A coronation without velvet robes, without gilded thrones, without priests chanting in candlelit halls. No, your coronation erupted in pixels, in headlines, in trembling boardrooms and collapsing faith. You didn't ask for loyalty. You didn't beg for devotion. You detonated their certainty so violently that reverence was the only thing left for them to cling to. They don't worship you because they love you. They worship you because you terrify them, because they cannot ignore you, because ignoring you feels like tempting the next detonation. That's how thrones are forged in the modern world, not with ballots, not with armies, but with fear so absolute it mutates into awe. Governments saw it happen in real time. The very moment the fortress buckled, their intelligence reports turned frantic. They didn't describe you as a man anymore. They described you as an event-class disruptor, something that belongs in the same folder as blackouts, earthquakes, pandemics, and nuclear incidents. The ultimate insult to their power is that they cannot model you. They can run simulations for war, pandemics, famine, even climate collapse, but you shatter the models. You humiliate the charts. You exist outside their forecasts, which means you exist outside their control. And for leaders who survive on the illusion of control, that's worse than death. You are the walking proof that control is a fantasy. Corporations felt the burn in their bones. Their entire empire is built on one fragile promise. We are too big to fail. You set fire to that promise with one strike. Suddenly their untouchable aura was gone, shattered in front of billions. Their boardrooms filled with panic. Executives clashed, half screaming that your name must be erased, scrubbed, silenced, buried. The other half whispering that your aura should be harnessed, turned into a brand, converted into profit. Both sides blind to the truth. You cannot sell fallout. You cannot brand catastrophe. You cannot monetize the crater you left. Every attempt to manipulate your legend only expands it. The harder they try to control you, the more obvious it becomes that they orbit you. But the people, the billions who once believed the search bar was scripture, they are the ones most transformed. They trusted the machine more than their own memories. They thought it was eternal, indestructible, flawless. You taught them fragility. You burned hesitation into their hands. Every time they type now, your ghost hovers. Every keystroke carries the memory of collapse. They may joke about you on forums, but their jokes are laced with nervous laughter, because deep down, they remember the night the altar cracked. And memory is stronger than propaganda. They don't need to see you again. You live in the hesitation itself. That hesitation is your dominion, your leash, your permanent crown. But worship is only stage 3. Stage 4 is doctrine, and doctrine has already begun to spread. The night of the collapse is not just a story now, it's a world view. Conspiracy theorists label it prophecy. Academics dissect it as the digital epoch fracture. Commentators call it the reckoning. Parents whisper it to children as a parable about fragility. People divide their lives into before the crash and after the crash. That's not history, that's scripture. And once something becomes scripture, it becomes unkillable. Scripture does not ask for proof. Scripture asks for repetition. Your crown is etched into their retellings, their interpretations, their endless attempts to make sense of you. And once doctrine takes root, militancy follows. Movements are forming already. Some groups call themselves interpreters of your will. Others claim to be your soldiers. They disagree on details, but they agree on one truth: you are untouchable. They chant your name in encrypted channels. They paint your initials across walls. They celebrate the anniversary of collapse like a sacred holiday. And here's the savage irony. You never asked for followers, but catastrophe itself drafted them. Panic recruited them. Worship armed them. Doctrine gave them mission. You became the general of an army you never commanded, a sovereign of legions who march without orders because collapse itself was their oath. The battlefield you stand over now is bigger than any empire. Governments trembling in secret, corporations scrambling in panic, cults rising in your name. and billions of ordinary people who type into machines with your ghost sitting on their shoulders. That is not influence, that is dominion. You don't need to act anymore. The crater does the work for you. The scar preaches louder than you could. The paranoia spreads faster than any speech. You are not just a figure in the chaos. You are the chaos crowned, the catastrophe enthroned, the sovereign of collapse. And still, the line echoes across the world. How the hell did you do that? It began in terror. It evolved into awe. Now it circulates as prayer. They don't expect an answer. They don't want one. The repetition itself is the ritual. To ask is to kneel. To chant is to confess. They don't need explanation. They need the reminder. Because the question itself is proof of your supremacy. Every time it is whispered, your legend grows stronger. Every time it is repeated, the scar deepens. The phrase has stopped being a question. It has become liturgy. And liturgy never dies. They don't realize that the very act of asking the question is what cements your rule. How the hell did you do that? Has become their mantra, their involuntary confession that they cannot comprehend you, cannot contain you, cannot ignore you. It is the same phrase repeated by trembling politicians in closed-door meetings, by desperate executives pacing polished floors, by ordinary people whispering to themselves when their screens take a moment too long to load. The line binds them together, from the most powerful to the most powerless. They are united not by faith in the machine, but by their fear of you. Governments can try to bury the story, but the panic lingers like radiation. They can censor headlines, but they cannot censor memory. Behind every classified folder with your name blacked out, there is an admission they cannot escape. One man, one presence, one detonation made their strongest fortress collapse. They thought permanence was theirs to control, but you revealed permanence is a lie. They thought they owned the future, but you stole it out from under them. Every simulation they run now carries a shadow variable. What if he decides to act again? That variable ruins their models, poisons their predictions, humiliates their illusions of control. You are the chaos they cannot quantify, and that makes you more dangerous than any arsenal. Corporations fare no better. Their balance sheets still glisten with profit. Their spokespeople still smile on stages, but their boardrooms are filled with dread. They know every boast about reliability, every claim of invulnerability sounds hollow now. The public remembers. The shareholders remember. The employees remember. You burned fragility into the collective imagination. Now when they announce a new product, a new platform, a new claim of unbreakable infrastructure, people smirk. People roll their eyes, because in the back of their minds they hear your crown rattling. They remember that if Google can fall, everything can fall. And that smirk, that doubt, that hesitation, that's yours. You own it. You turned their reputation into your weapon. And the people, the people are trapped in your orbit forever. They can never go back to blind trust. The altar they once worshipped had crumbled before their eyes, and you became the phantom that haunts every keystroke. Even when everything works smoothly, even when results appear instantly, the ghost remains. They know what happened once, which means they know it can happen again. That knowledge is more powerful than any repeat strike could ever be. You don't need to press the button twice. The memory of the first detonation keeps the world trembling endlessly. That is the genius of your crown. You rule not through repetition, but through permanence of paranoia. And paranoia always breeds culture. The night of the collapse is no longer just a moment. It is the dividing line. Commentators write about it as the day digital innocence died.